welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 114, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. Now that Sew Expo is over, I've had some time to get back into my sewing room. I did do some teaching at the store last week. Last week I taught a toaster sweater class, that's the Sew House 7 pattern. And then on Saturday I taught another Sew House 7 pattern, the free range slacks, and I think that has become the most popular class that I teach at the store. This was the third time that I've taught that class, and I had 3 students, and each one of them was able to complete a pair of pants in the class. It's an all-day class. One lady had never sewn a garment before, and she made a pair of pants out of the Fabulism woven, one of the Fabulism woven fabrics. Another lady used some Kaif fabric, and the third lady came in and said that she had made pants before, but never pants with pockets because she was terrified of pockets. And the nice thing about the free range slacks is that they've got great front pockets on them. And by the time she left class, she wasn't afraid of pockets anymore. And she said she was going to go home and make several more pairs because she had a whole lot of linen fabric in her stash. And I think that's a great pattern for linen. So if you've been thinking about making yourself a pair of pants, but you don't want to get into all of the fitting hassles, try the free range slacks and see what you think. It's a pull-on elasticized waist design with front slash pockets. The pattern comes in a tapered version and a cropped wide leg version. And I've actually lengthened the wide leg version and made a long pair of pants. So it's pretty versatile. They're very comfortable. I wear mine a lot. And I know I'm starting to sound like I'm advertising for Sew House 7, but I've made their free range slacks, their toaster sweater, and I just finished the Burnside bibs. I'm going to talk about those in a second. And I have a lot of great things to say about the Sew House 7 patterns. They're very well done. They're very well thought out. The instructions are excellent. So I can highly recommend the free range slacks. The Burnside bibs are not a style that I would wear necessarily, but one of the young women that works at the store really liked them. And I said I would be happy to make her a pair because we kicked around the idea of doing it as a class, and I didn't want to schedule it as a class until I had started making them. And when I first started working on them, I thought this is a little bit too involved for a class. It would have to be a multi-day class for one thing, and I'm not sure that most of my students would have the skill level because a lot of them are beginning garment makers. So I made this pair out of a wide back we picked out at the store. And if you haven't seen the pattern, they're a pair of bib overalls. The straps go into, so the straps cross in the back and they morph into long ties that go through belt loops on the back waistband of the bibs, and then you can either tie them in the back or bring the ties around and tie them in the front. So I made this pair of bibs, and I had said to the young woman that I was making them for that the wide back cost me as much as the muslin would have cost. So I said, we're just going to use the wide back version as the quote unquote muslin. So I took them to the store Saturday before my class, and she tried them on. They are absolutely darling on her. And another one of the employees at the store has also made the Burnside bibs, and she brought them into the store, and hers are darling too. I didn't see her wearing them, but it's a cute design, especially for younger women. What we decided about the ones that I had made out of the wide back was that I probably needed to go up one size for her. So we're going to do them again. She's got a Tula Pink wide back that she's been hoarding. She's an absolute Tula Pink fangirl. So I told her that I would make the second pair one size up and I would do them out of the Tula Pink wide back. So those have been fun. And, one of the things about the more complicated garment patterns is that you kind of have to not think of it all at once and just approach it in a step-by-step format. So maybe you go into it and you say, okay, today I'm going to cut my fabric. And then the next time you go into the sewing room, you say, okay, today I'm going to do the pant legs. And you just get as far as you can get in every sewing session, and you don't put the pressure on yourself to complete the garment in one sitting. I know I have a tendency to do that, and I suspect other people do as well. The other project that I've been working on is the Rosebud Quilted Coat by Anna Maria Perry. I've got all the pieces quilted except for the 2 collar pieces, and I started assembling the coat. I'm not doing it with a lining. I just quilted my quilt sandwich with the top and the batting and the backing, which is the same way that I did my Bernina University jacket. I am binding the inside seams. So I bound the shoulder seams and I bound the sleeve seams. And when you bind inside seams on a coat like that, they can get very bulky. Part of me is wishing that I had just serged the outside edges of each piece, which is what I did on my BU jacket, because nobody's going to see the inside of the jacket. But I'm committed now to binding it, and so I just have to bind the body and sleeve seams and then the collar seam once I get the collar sewn on. It's a darling jacket. I will say that it's a drop shoulder style, and one of the things that I learned as a knitting designer is that drop shouldered sweaters, which are basically a rectangle for the body and then 2 kind of cut off triangles for the sleeves, the sleeve body seam tends to fall right at the widest part of the chest. So if you're kind of a busty woman like me, drop-shouldered sweaters are not very flattering, and neither are drop-shouldered coats. The reason a lot of designers use that style is because it's easy. There isn't any sleeve cap shaping. There isn't worrying about setting the sleeve cap into an arm side. But I think that this coat would benefit from a little bit of sleeve and sleeve cap shaping and armhole shaping. I'll get it out. Just to give it a little less bulk at that point. I put it on and it does feel like a big hug. This will probably end up going to the store as a store sample. I keep saying that I want to design the perfect quilted jacket, which has the best features of all the quilted jackets that I've made so far, and none of the pitfalls. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get around to doing that, but it's something that's on my list. So that's what I've been sewing. The weather is starting to change here. We did get a little bit of snow over the weekend. We got about 6 inches here at my house, but it's supposed to be 60 degrees by the end of the week. So I'm starting to think about what kind of warmer weather clothes I want to make. And I'm going to probably be putting the quilted jacket projects away for a while. After I record this podcast, I'm going to the store because the store is closed on Mondays, and once a month they do kind of like a staff education day. So I'm going in today to teach my thread class to the store staff, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be a nice relaxed atmosphere, and the staff doesn't always get the chance to sew, so it'll be a good fellowship time for all of us. So today I want to talk about pattern hacking, because that is a question that I have gotten several times. Would I talk about pattern hacking? And I refer to this kind of euphemistically as Frankenpatterning. If you read my blog, a lot of times I will talk about how I Frankenpattern something. And it's a very useful skill to develop. I didn't think it was difficult, and I am one of the worst spatially perceptive people on the planet. So when I say that something like that is relatively easy to learn, you're hearing it from somebody who kind of struggles with that stuff. I'm sure that there are many ways to do this. I'm going to talk about the ways that make the most sense to me and what I have done. But if this doesn't work for you, feel free to experiment and find a method that does work for you. So let's start by talking about what is Frankenpatterning and why do I do it? So Frankenpatterning is where I maybe take different parts of a couple of different patterns and I mash them together. You could also think of it as a pattern mashup, although to me that sounds kind of sloppy. And the reason that I do it is because it's very hard to find one perfect pattern. So I may find a really great woven tee pattern, but it doesn't have the sleeve style that I want, or I may find a dress pattern, but it has a round neckline and I want a V neckline. Maybe the jacket pattern that I'm making has a collar and I would prefer to have a hood. Those are the reasons why you might want to hack a pattern or do some Frankenpatterning. If you're a beginning garment sewist, it might seem a little scary to wade off by yourself and not follow the pattern, but after you've done it a few times, it's actually very liberating, and you begin to see the pattern more as a starting point rather than a complete package in itself. One of the big reasons that I started Frankenpatterning was because it helped me to get around some fit issues, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. I would say that the first step is finding a tried and true pattern that fits you well, that is a basic, very simple pattern. So let's talk about making tops. Find a shell pattern or a simple blouse pattern, just something. There are a lot of them out there. Almost every single pattern line has something like this that maybe has a round neckline or a V neckline if you have a preference for one or the other, and make that up and get that to fit you really, really well. And understand that this may take several iterations of muslins, but you want to make sure that the shoulders fit you well, that the darts are in the right location and at the right height, that the length is good, and recognize that you may have to try several different pattern company patterns. So when I was trying to come up with my perfect woven tee pattern for the tops that I like to make out of rayon batiks or rayon challis, I actually started with a Berta pattern because I liked the sleeves and I liked the neckline, which is kind of a dumb thing to do because I wasn't really concerned about the body. I liked the style details. I should have been more concerned about the body. But I made that pattern up and I really, really liked it. The only problem was that it was a bit narrow in the shoulders, and I have broad shoulders. This is an ongoing issue. But then I happened to make up the Love Notions Cadence top for a shop sample for the store down in Missoula, because they thought they might want to offer it as a class. And when I made that top, I realized that the back from that top, or the shoulders, were broad enough that they fit me really well. So I basically slapped the sleeves and the neckline from the Berta top onto the Love Notions Cadence top, and came up with something that I really liked. And that has now become my go-to woven top pattern. And not only that, but once you get a really good fitting top pattern for you, you can use it as kind of your sloper. It's not really a sloper, but it's close enough that you can take that pattern piece and lay it on top of other patterns to see how close it is to those patterns in shape and size. So finding yourself a good base pattern that you can then hack is the first step. Once you've got that basic block or that basic pattern for yourself, then you can start experimenting with things like changing the length. So lengthen it into a tunic or even into a dress, or add pockets, or change the neckline. That Berta top that I mentioned before that I started with has a V neckline, and part of the reason I love the V neckline on that top is because it is not a plunging V neckline. I very rarely choose patterns with V necklines because they're always too low, and I am fairly busty, and I have to wear some architectural bras to hold up the girls, and low V-necks, even if I didn't mind showing some cleavage, always expose my bra. If you are one of those lucky people who is not very well endowed, and I say that because the grass is always greener on the other side, and I know that people who are lacking in that department sometimes wish that they had more real estate there, but I can tell you that that is not without problems. But anyway, if you are lucky enough to be able to wear those dainty little lacy bras and you don't mind exposing them, then by all means, the lower V-necks are great for you. But for me, not so much. So I keep that Berta pattern around because I like that V neckline. It's a great neckline on me. Adding pockets is not terribly difficult. You can add them in a side seam, or you can add patch pockets. If you look at commercial patterns, you notice that a lot of them may come in both a top and a dress version because it's fairly easy to lengthen a well-fitting top into a dress. I might not start my pattern hacking with the sleeves. Sleeves can be tricky. Getting a good fitting sleeve depends not only on the shape of the sleeve and the sleeve cap, but also the shape of the armscye. And if those two things don't go together well, then you're going to have problems at the sleeve. So I wouldn't start with sleeves, but having said that, there are ways to modify the sleeves, and we'll talk about that now. The easiest way to change a sleeve, obviously, is to change the length. So the Berta pattern that I was using at the beginning had a 3/4 length sleeve, and that's fairly easy to modify into a longer sleeve or a shorter sleeve. If the pattern has a lengthen shorten line on it, you can cut it there, spread it apart, and then redraw the side seams. You can change the shape of the sleeve, but to do this, it often helps to find a pattern that has that kind of a sleeve. So I'm talking about things like a bishop sleeve, where you've got a lot of fullness at the cuff that's gathered into a cuff, those kind of statement sleeves. Or perhaps you want to shorten it to a flutter sleeve. I find it helpful to look for patterns that have those details and keep those around to at least compare to. I have a large pattern stash, and it isn't because I necessarily want to make each of those patterns, but I bought certain patterns because maybe they had details that I thought I could incorporate down the line. So that's why I keep them around. If you want to swap the entire sleeve, this gets a little bit trickier, but it's still doable. Obviously, you want to try to stay as close to the shape of the sleeve as you can. So we're not going to be swapping a set-in sleeve for a raglan or a raglan for a set-in sleeve. Those are just a little bit too different to be able to interchange well. I will talk about the actual process in a couple of minutes, but just know that you don't want to drastically change the shape of your garment or your pattern pieces. We're starting with small tweaks. And it's worth noting here that a lot of pattern companies will put out a pattern and then they will also put out an expansion pack, which has all of the hacks in it for you. So that's a great way to get started because the pattern company knows their patterns and they've already done some of the work for you. I want to emphasize that this is not a linear process. I'm making it sound like a linear process for this podcast episode, but there are a lot of rabbit holes and detours and twists and turns and muslins that don't work. And this is something that I've been doing for a number of years now. So you're not going to get it 100% right off the bat. So lower your expectations and give yourself some grace. What are some of the pitfalls to watch out for? That's a great question. So the first one is don't try to mix patterns for garments of different fabric types. So don't try to mix wovens with knits. I actually ran into this about a year ago with a pattern, one of the big four pattern company patterns that I was trying. I can't remember whether it was Simplicity or Butterick or McCall's. It was one of those. And I had purchased the pattern because it was kind of an athleisure type outfit. It was a sporty dress with a quarter zip neckline. And I made it up and I was working on the neckline and I thought, this feels to me almost like they took the neckline from a woven garment and tried to glom it onto a pattern for a knit garment, because the technique for putting in the zipper and finishing the collar was not a technique I would have used with a knit fabric. And I did not find the results to be satisfactory at all. I thought I should really remake it and redo the zipper and the collar the way I think they should be done, but I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. I have way more ideas than time. But in any case, don't try to mix patterns for wovens and knits. There are some patterns that you can get away with using certain knit fabrics. So for certain woven patterns, you can use a stable knit like a Ponte, because it doesn't behave as much like a knit as some of the other stretchier knits, if that makes sense. But that takes a little bit of experience and knowing when you can substitute certain fabrics for other fabrics. So I'm thinking of maybe making the Style Arc Linda pants, which are designed for a stretch woven fabric, making those in a lightweight Ponte. And that's the kind of substitution that I could get away with. While we're on the subject of pants, I do want to mention part of the reason I use that the Style Arc Linda pant, and they aren't selling it right now, but they have one called Barb, which is similar. The reason I use that is because that is the one pant pattern that I have found that is a pull-on pant without a stretchy elastic waist like the free-range slacks. But the reason I like that pant pattern so much is because the rise on it was high enough for me. I have a very long torso and I'm long from my natural waist down to my crotch. So I always have trouble. And when I found that pant pattern, I now use that kind of as my pant block for any pull-on pant. And I've hacked it into wide leg and narrow leg, and I want to make a pair of culottes out of it. I could probably even use it to make a pencil skirt. But getting back to potential pitfalls when pattern hacking, so that's one of them, mixing patterns for wovens and knits. A second one is not checking your seam lines. So there's something called walking the seams. You have to remember when you're working with a pattern that it's got a seam line, whether that's 3/8 of an inch or 5/8 of an inch. So you're not matching the edges of the pattern, you're actually matching the seam lines. So if you need to, draw the seam lines in on the pattern and then walk them. So what you're doing is you're matching up the seam lines and you're basically moving the pattern along the seam lines to make sure that one of the seam lines isn't longer than one of the other seam lines. It can be deceptive sometimes. Things look like they're going to fit, but they don't. And that's especially important when you're substituting things like sleeves. Another big one is not making sure that the grain lines are straight. So if you are substituting or taking a part of one pattern and attaching it to another pattern, you need to make sure that your grain lines are straight. They don't have to be right on top of each other, but they need to be parallel to each other. What you don't want is to add something to your pattern that's going to throw off the grain line and then the garment's not going to hang straight. This is an audio podcast and it has its limitations. I can't draw you a picture and show you what I mean. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice. So let's say that you came to me and you said, "Hey Janet, I've got this blouse pattern and I really like it. It fits me well, but it has a plain short sleeve and I want to change the sleeve to a bishop sleeve. And I have this other pattern that has a bishop sleeve that I really, really like. And so I want to kind of mash the two together." So the first thing is going to be to assemble the tools that we need. So we'll need tracing paper. I use Pellon Easy pattern, but plain tracing paper from Staples or another office supply store works fine. Pattern weights, my French curve, and my other pattern drafting rulers. Mine are the metal Variform, Varyform rulers. You can get them on Amazon. And I would have a sharpened supply of pencils. I'm kind of particular about my drafting pencils. I get them from the local hardware store. My husband, being a contractor, goes down there and grabs me a handful every couple of months. They're free on the contractor's desk, and these are regular round pencils. They're not the carpenter pencils, but I really like them, and I keep a pencil sharpener in my sewing room so that I always have nice sharp ones to work with. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to trace the patterns. I do not ever alter or adjust my original pattern, because if I want to go back and use it for something, I want it to be intact. So I'm going to trace the front and the back of the blouse as well as the sleeve. And the reason I trace all three of those pieces is because I'm going to want to look at how the sleeve cap fits into the armscye. So once I have all of the pieces traced and labeled and cut out, and labeling is very important, we don't want to get things mixed up, then I will start laying them on top of each other to compare them. Very rarely do they match nicely. Usually one pattern or the other is going to have to be adjusted. So then I'm going to ask myself, what's going to be the most difficult thing to adjust? So on this sleeve, probably the sleeve cap is what's going to be the most difficult piece to adjust. So my choices are to use my existing well-fitting blouse pattern and change the lower half of the sleeve to be the kind of sleeve that I want, or use the complete sleeve pattern from the sleeve that I want to graft onto my favorite blouse pattern and change my blouse pattern so that it accepts that sleeve cap. Obviously, one of those things is going to be more difficult than the other. As much as possible, I'm going to preserve my well-fitting blouse pattern and just change the bottom half of the sleeve, if that makes sense. And you may be able to do this without tracing. You may be able to do this by laying one of the patterns on top of the other pattern in the original form, but I like to trace everything off. It's just easier for me to see it that way. So in that case, I would say let's just hack the bottom half of the existing sleeve pattern to look like the pattern that you want to graft into your favorite blouse pattern. I have a lot of trouble visualizing things in my head, and I like to see things laid out in front of me with a picture. My husband has learned this. When he wants to build something, he always says, I'm going to draw you a picture. Because if he just describes it to me, I can't see it. And even when I can see it, I don't always get it right. Pattern hacking is a skill, and it's a skill that takes time and practice to acquire. So don't be too hard on yourself. Give yourself some grace. You can always check things by making a muslin. I can't tell you how many times I've made that hacked Berta pattern, probably close to 6 or 8 times now, and I still tweak it here and there. Start small, stack up some easy wins, and your confidence will start to grow. I would say that just about every single garment sewist I know eventually becomes a pattern hacker, because we're all creative people and we all want to push the boundaries, and the reason you sew is to make things that fit you. So don't be afraid of changing things. I think what you'll find as you get deeper and deeper into pattern hacking is that you're beginning to amass a library of custom pieces for yourself. I think of Rylas Bode at the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma, Washington. The door that leads to the hallway in her office, in her sewing studio, has a bunch of different pocket patterns hanging on the back of it. And she said, I got tired of tracing off pocket patterns, so every time I made a different kind of pattern, I just saved the pocket and I put it up here on the door. And that way, if I want to change a pocket, I just reach for the pocket design that I want and it's already there. It's almost like the Mr. Potato Head method of garment design or garment making, because you're starting with your base pattern and then you're adding other pieces to make a unique garment. And you will get to a point where parts of it become intuitive. I know that it has for me. I can lay a couple of patterns out to compare them and look at them, and I can say, oh, I need to do this to this shoulder line and this to this arm side in order to make this sleeve cap fit. The more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the easier it becomes to see what the changes might be. But start small. I think that's the key. Don't try to redesign or redraft an entire garment. Change something small. Okay, if you want to ask additional questions, if there's something that I forgot to cover, hopefully not something glaringly obvious, you can send me feedback at janet@janetzabo.com. You can use the fan mail feature. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. One of my listeners so very generously emailed me with a list of a few other quilted coat patterns, so I'm going to try to add those to last week's show notes page so that you have those available. Show notes are available on the podcast website, and that is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com. That has links to my blog, which is where I put all of my sewing projects, pictures. Right now we have chicks, so I occasionally put chick pictures up there. That's the place to go for in-depth commentary on what's going on. I think I caught up on all of my emails this past week. If I haven't responded to you, please let me know. January and February were kind of nuts. If you have suggestions for podcast guests, I am interested in those as well. I have gotten suggestions for podcast guests, but if I haven't been able to get those guests on the podcast, it isn't always for lack of trying. So some people just don't want to be on the podcast, or our schedules aren't compatible. So please continue to send me those suggestions, but know that I can't always make it happen. And podcast topic suggestions are always welcome too. So until next time, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go hack some patterns.